Over 60% of corruption cases in Nigeria are procurement related. This is tragic given that the annual expenditure on procurement is estimated to range from 10 to 25% of the country's GDP. Nigeria's procurement process cries for a reform. Hi there, my name is Great Nnamani. I am a research and communications assistant at the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa. In this episode of the Research Table, we will be discussing public procurement and good governance in Nigeria as it relates to transparency, skills gap, and the gender responsiveness of procurement. Procurement is the acquisition of goods and services. So, public procurement, simply put, is the acquisition or purchase of goods, services, and works by government entities, public bodies, or public institutions from external suppliers and vendors. To really understand Nigeria's procurement processes, it is important we examine the country's procurement practices. One of those practices is the publishing of procurement policies and plans by government entities. According to the Public Procurement Act of 2007, all government entities and public bodies are expected to publish their plans and policies annually. And this is often found amongst ministries, departments, and agencies. And secondly, there is the advertisement of tender notices. So the Act also encourages or expects rather that government bodies and entities advertise their tender notices on two national newspapers. And this is often found in those newspapers and very obvious. And then thirdly, there is the bidding strategy. There are basically two types of bidding strategy. There are the competitive bidding strategy and the selective bidding strategy. So the competitive bidding strategy often helps the government save the value for money or recover the value for money because it is very open and it offers the ministry the opportunity to receive bidding from several bidders. But the selective bidding strategy, on the other hand, is restricted to only a few number of bidders and should be used on only certain occasions, for instance, in the acquisition of military equipment. But you will discover in Nigeria's case that on several occasions, the selective bidding strategy is used when the competitive bidding strategy should be used. And finally, there is the supervision of procured goods. According to the Public Procurement Act of 2007, it is expected that the Bureau of Public Procurement monitor and supervise all procured goods and services. This is often found in Nigeria's case. Several challenges ravage the Nigerian procurement system. One of those key challenges is transparency. Nigeria is facing a very big transparency challenge, and although there is no specific data to measure the level of transparency of public procurement, there are some pointers that can help us really understand this. And some of those pointers include budget openness, judiciary independence, and the level of public participation. So, according to the International Budget Partnership Open Budget Survey, the Open Budget Survey actually assigns scores to the budget openness of countries from 0 to 100. Scores between 0 to 40 are termed weak, 41 to 60 are termed limited, and 61 to 100 are termed adequate. As of 2006, Nigeria's budget openness was just 20, but by 2021, it had risen to about 45, which is still limited. Secondly, there is a skills gap problem. Nigeria is facing a very big skills gap challenge because only a handful of procurement officers have been trained so far since the establishment of BPP and the centers through the support of the World Bank. This implies that there will be a high risk of corruption and embezzlement through procurement practices. Then there is also the challenge of gender responsiveness. Currently, women account for less than 5% of public procurement contracts in Nigeria, even despite the fact that women account for almost 50% of Nigeria's population. And then one other final challenge is political will. We've seen over time that there is less political will, to really implement strategies and innovative approaches that would help drive Nigeria's public procurement processes forward. One of those instances is that since 2016, when the government initiated a 1.6 billion contract to implement an e-procurement portal in Nigeria, that portal has not been adopted and created up till now, except for the National Open Contracting Portal, NOCOPO, which is just for exposing bids and tracking contract for public procurement contracts. A very good way to reform Nigeria's public procurement processes and practices is to adopt e-procurement. Adopting e-procurement implies that the government is able to monitor the intricacies of all procurement contracts. Then, secondly, it is also important for the government to engage in series of trainings for procurement staffs and to also ensure that trained staff are able to also train their colleagues when they return back from training. Then it is also important for the government to ensure that there are intentional policies created to favor women as it relates to public procurement. For instance, there could be allocation of certain percentage of procurement contracts to women just to facilitate them and to encourage women who engage in public procurement or who bid for procurement contracts. And then finally, I think it's important for the government to be very intentional about the public procurement process in Nigeria because their intentionality will go a long way in not just creating policies alone, but ensuring that policies and recommendations profiled in the acts are engaged and implemented.